To hear your views, you can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, what dangers is Uganda and other African countries likely to face due to climate change? Also, are governments taking these matters seriously? For several years now, the world has grappled with troubles related to climate change, which has negatively affected many livelihoods worldwide. Problems related to climate change have already manifested themselves in Uganda, and experts on climate and environmental matters warn that the situation is likely to get worse if no mitigating measures are undertaken. As part of efforts to encourage African governments to respond positively to this challenge, civil society and other stakeholders have launched the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance with the aim to mobilize for responses. On the other hand, African governments are pushing Western countries, whom they blame for exacerbating the situation, to provide the funding needed for mitigation, but efforts in this direction have not yet yielded much. Global talks on climate change have not yielded enough, and nations around the world are now preparing for another round of talks. One fact that seems to unite all stakeholders is the urgent need to take measures that can help in reducing the negative impact on the environment. So tonight we take a look at the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance campaign to try and understand what proposals they are making and also establish the gaps that need to be covered in order to have the required adaptation and mitigation measures. Our guests tonight, Mr. Isaac Kabong, Chairman, Climate Action Network-Uganda, also Executive Director of the Ecological Christian Organization. You're most welcome, Mr. Kabong.
Thank you, Kizito.
We are also joined by Mr. Bakika, Deputy Executive Director of the Bwaise-based Environmental Management for Livelihood. You're most welcome, Mr. Bakika.
Thank you very much.
Let's try to bring this point home. Mr. Bakika, the phenomenon of climate change, we've been talking about and hearing about it for a long time. In Uganda, what exactly does it mean?
Thank you very much for asking such a wonderful question. Climate change in Uganda tries to mean what are the current changes in terms of weather patterns and in terms of the extreme changes which we are currently facing. For example, if you remember in 2007, the Teso floods, that was an example of the extreme weather changes Uganda as a nation experienced. Also, if now you updated about decreasing snow cap at Mountain Renzori, also that is another example of the adverse impacts of climate change the country is facing. Now you know very well that most of our soils in the country do not support much of what we put in the soil, because soils have lost the nutrients, soils have been exhausted, and now soils are too dry that they can't give support to anything which we try to put in soil. So we are trying to use now a lot of other chemicals, mechanization, in that we can use the soils which our forefathers never used to apply such chemicals to come up with produce from their soil.
Well, but that's expected. You overfarm the land. That's not climate change, does it? Affect it?
In this context, I'm not trying to mean about overfarming, because we know that you can use the same land time and memorial, because this land does not change. But we are talking about the extreme weather events. Give an example. When a flood takes place in Teso region and it sweeps off the fertile soil in that region, really it will be extremely difficult for that land in Teso to yield the same yield it yielded certain years ago before such extreme weather patterns did take place.
Let's look at the roots. What would we have done to bring on these bad effects?
Really, there is much we would have done as a nation and as individuals, but all in all, I try to zeal this to the principle of development which a nation has to take on. For example, Uganda, we have to take on our development trajectory And there are some people who took their development trajectory a long time ago. And you know very well that Industrial Revolution was the anchor of development to most of our counter-developed colleagues. Now, as you know, most of them depended on fossil fuels and depended on industrialization to achieve the level of development they are at. And for us, we are still using the usual low-cost technology, man-made farming. And in that case, the issue of changing the weather patterns globally is always attributed to our developed partners who come from the developed world, that they achieve their development strategy on our extreme, that they took part of the atmospheric space and they utilized it selfishly without taking into consideration of other part of the globe. And in that case, the current atmosphere is in such a state that we are paying for what we didn't do. That our colleagues did whatever we are suffering, and now a game plan has changed that we had the least impact on the catastrophes which are facing the world, are the ones now taking the lead in again reforming or building up the mistakes our colleagues did. So this is why our countries and some of us in civil society, we are meeting in Durban this month from 28th to 9th December during the Conference of Parties under the Convention on Climate Change to channel ways on how we can compromise and take responsibility of what we have done to our weather.
We'll look at that in more detail later, specifically why the rich have benefited our expense and now why we're paying the price. Mr. Kabong, what have we done locally to merit this?
Locally, there are different initiatives and different plans, and I think the biggest achievement which this nation has ever achieved in terms of climate change is in terms of the establishment of what we call the Climate Change Unit, which was established by government and to coordinate issues of climate change in the country. That gives us an opportunity to work with government and other key stakeholders to advance our actions. But also, another big achievement and a very important action which we are really taking is that civil society came together in the form of our coalition called the Climate Action Network-Uganda to work with other key institutions, the private sector, government agencies, and local communities to find ways and measures to mitigate the impact, but also to raise the vulnerable communities to the impacts of climate change. Robert has highlighted on the floods, the Teso floods, the famous 1997 Teso floods, but also we are going through quite a number of different climate change impacts in terms of manifested in terms of droughts, culminating into famine. We have had the cases of new diseases coming up in certain areas, and I think the emergence of hepatitis B and also the emergence of malaria in areas which never had malaria, like Kabale and even in Kapchorwa, are very good examples, living examples for us to understand that actually the problem is with us. And therefore, this calls for collective action. I've always been sharing this, that the responsibility to take action in terms of doing something in climate change, it's not a responsibility of one institution, it's a responsibility of all of us. Local communities have their way of doing things and they have their space, they can do something. You find that local communities are rich with their what we call the indigenous knowledge. They have lived in those very harsh conditions for centuries. For example, in Karamoja, people have lived there for centuries. But if you are new and you go to Karamoja, you will find that you say, how have these people really adapted to this kind of weather? You know, they have been there for centuries. And they have quite very big good practices on how they have been being able to adapt to this. So we can also learn from them. How have they been able to live in such a way? So for Climate Action Network Uganda, our work is to work with all the partners and especially raise the voices of the powerless or of the voiceless, especially regarding how they are affected by climate change, and working together to finding some kind of solutions to this. And we are really working together with government to make sure that we advance Uganda's position in the negotiation processes. And through the Conference of Parties, the 7th Conference of Parties, which is going to take place in Durban, which Robert has highlighted, we are thinking that Uganda should focus on key issues and messages, and saying we need to work with other countries, because we remember the negotiation process, you can't work alone as a single country. You have to come together. You speak with one common voice. As African Union, as the African group, there are different negotiation groups. And this calls for collective action. So what we are saying is that our partners, our development partners, the developed countries, have really caused a lot of damage to our environment, especially the atmospheric kind of space, as Robert mentioned. And we need to find a way of reaching a compromise. We're saying, okay, you did this, we agree to work together solving the problem, and there are responsibilities for countries which didn't contribute much, but also there are responsibilities for developed countries that are part of a big cause to this. So what we are focusing on is to find a way of collective action. But collective action should come with the norm of accepting that actually this climate change we are facing is human-induced. We are the causes of it, and the solution is actually should be coming from we ourselves. And what we are saying in the whole negotiation process is that we need justice, because this is an issue of justice. The developed world have developed at the expense of the undeveloped countries, the developing countries. And this should not be taken as if it's something to be natural. It's very, very unnatural in such a way that you are living on the expense of the others, Yes. So it's like we are living on a borrowed kind of reef. So we need to say, what kind of justice mechanism should we come up with in order for them to realize the fact that what they did was not good, but also we are not condemning them that they should really not be there, that they should continue working together with developed countries to reach a compromise. And that's why the negotiations are really very important.
You mentioned malaria going to Kabale and Kapchorwa. These are traditionally cold places, and malaria doesn't thrive in cold places. Yes. But they are also disparate. They are far apart. One is on the west coast, western boundary, the other is on the eastern boundary. So that means the causes of this heating is something that's probably not a localized climate thing. How can we reverse that?
It is true that climate doesn't know borders, and it doesn't recognize that this is the border for Kenya or for this community. Climate issues are global issues, and they're also development issues. And the action of Uganda today alone will not help so much in helping the problem. And that's what we are saying, that we need to work together, both the developed countries and the developing countries, to find ways of how to reach that level in terms of reducing the degrees in terms of Celsius on degrees that are acceptable and can support humanity. And as Africa, we are pushing for 1.5 degrees.
What do you mean by that?
1.5 Celsius degrees is that in order for us to be able to reach that level of saying that we are not having catastrophic climate change, we need to reduce carbon emissions, yes, from the atmosphere to such a level that it will support
the world cools a little bit.
Exactly. At least to 1.5, exactly.
By 1.5 degrees Celsius. Celsius.
Yes.
We'll try to understand that a little bit later. Listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, what dangers is Uganda and other African countries likely to face due to climate change? Our government's taking these matters seriously. Our guest, Mr. Isaac Kabong, climate change chairman of the Climate Action Network in Uganda, also executive director of the Ecological Christian Organization. Just heard him speak. We also have Mr. Robert Bakika, deputy executive director of the Bwaise-based Environmental Management for Livelihood. Mr. Bakika, you said that the Western world developed at our expense. They banned the ozone layer and now we're paying the price. Explain that to us in more detail.
Yeah, I will try to relate it on a bank, and we people who take our money in the bank.
Yes, compared to keeping it under the bed. Go on.
Yeah. So in this scenario, when you have money and you put it in a bank, you have the advantage that it cannot actually be damaged under your bed, under your soil, under your what. But there are conditions when you need to borrow your money.
Yes.
But it's your money,
yes,
remember, and it's you who put that money. So, like, when you want to access your money, you first have to follow through a process. But recall, this is your money. Now, why do we say that people who did mistakes earlier are the ones now making us suffer the burden? Putting it clearly is, we know the developed world achieved these advanced stages on the expense of the least developing countries. And what we try to allude to this is, for example, if you take countries in Europe, the level of development they are on, having flyovers, underground trains, and what, whereby now it's very hard to find a green space in their countries. But when you come to our countries, we are aiming to go to such a step. There are conditions which now we are given to advance to such a step. So this is why we are saying that let's share the atmospheric place.
How do we share it?
How do we share it? For example, if Uganda is trying to come up with a Kampala master plan,
yes,
to come up with a flyover in Kampala,
yes,
it should be given the required resources to come up to that. It should be given the required resources for it to mitigate the catastrophic effects of climate change.
Yes.
It should be given the money to help its communities adapt to the floodings which have come out of extreme events. Like my colleague Isaac told you that climate change has no borders.
Yes.
One thing many of us don't understand is that even if Uganda could mitigate to its maximum,
right,
it can't do anything in Africa because Uganda is just a minute all of Africa.
Right.
And we are saying that we are talking about issues relating to the ozone layer, which you are talking about.
Right.
Ozone layer does not only cover Uganda.
True.
So even if Uganda could do every project that can absorb, that would be a very small context, right, in the bigger matter.
Let's understand the ozone layer a little bit. This is a thick layer of air, gaseous existence that blankets the world and shields us from the direct sun's rays. Is that right?
Yes. This is a blanket, but you know, this blanket again has been reducing almost every year.
Development releases gases into the ozone layer and it burns this blanket,
which keeps on reducing with time.
And then the sun's rays hit us very hard.
Just come direct to us.
Ice caps on the mountains begin to melt.
True.
Places like Kabong and Kapchora begin to warm. They were cold before, and mosquitoes don't thrive in cold places. True. So now they get malaria and other things.
Yes.
How do we rebuild that ozone layer?
How do we rebuild the ozone layer? One, we say that these processes that attribute such catastrophic effects has been put under a global interface. For example, the ozone layer has a convention which is called the Montreal Protocol. This Montreal Protocol is considered the most successful protocol all over all the multilateral environment agreements in the world, because it's a protocol where almost 196 member states to the protocol committed to phasing out chlorofluorocarbons, which reduce the ozone layer. So in this case, that was one part of the way. But again, we saw that only targeted a few of the gases which reduce the ozone layer.
Right.
So in order to bring in other gases, governments in this world had to sit and come up with a convention in 1995.
Right.
Which convention now is called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Yes.
In simple, it's UNFCCC.
Right.
Which this year is having its 17th sitting under the Conference of Parties. Why do governments find time to sit and discuss? Because these are some of the mechanisms where they dialogue and come to consensus or compromise on how to share that atmospheric press. So this is the only avenue where the developed world, who misbehaved earlier, can sit on the table and agree on commitments they pledged earlier when they started sitting on the table to discuss. So we are saying that that is one of the mechanisms, which is the global mechanism. But we have also the national initiatives. For example, now we have a tree planting campaign in our country.
Yes.
Though people have changed it in planting every type of tree. And some of the trees have a low absorptive capacity to absorb some of these gases.
Like pine trees and so on.
Yeah, like pine, also eucalyptus and others.
Right.
There are so many of such type.
Right.
Again, governments in this world and even national or including individual level have gone to steps of trying to use energy efficiently. I've gone into steps of trying even to replant. I've gone into steps of trying to plant drought-resistant crop varieties.
Yes.
But why are we pushed to this extreme, yet the people who misbehaved earlier are there looking? So this is why we are saying we need to come to an amicable solution and share the global space together.
All right.
Without limiting our right to development, because we must develop. That is a right.
All right, we'll talk about the Durban conference and other things, but maybe before we go for a break, let's talk about those CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. Explain them to us a little bit, and the other gases that you didn't mention.
Okay. Still, this relates more on the
come from refrigerators and
some come from refrigerators, some come from perfumes, some are industry manufactured, some come out of industrial byproducts. Like I said, because now Uganda we are mining oil.
Yes.
And some of the catastrophic effects coming from the oil, we are becoming among the biggest emitters. Because just flaring oil, you don't know how much carbon you are burning.
Right.
Because we don't have such
how much carbon you're releasing into the atmosphere.
Yes.
Burning oxygen and releasing carbon. Yes, go on.
So in this case, these are some of the gases we are producing in Uganda. Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, HFCs, but even some of them we don't know.
Well.
Methane from the garbage in Kampala. But there are even other gases which other governments are proposing to add into the list. There are even those that are being produced but they are not accounted for.
All right, this is Spectrum on Radio, and we're going for a break. We'll be back. Do stay tuned.
Let the sunlight in.
Good morning, sunshine of my life. You look happy today.
I am. I came in here and I saw there was a whole pile of washing to do.
But I thought you didn't like doing the washing.
No, I love it. Anything else you need washed?
Sunlight 2-in-1 with added fabric softener. Smells so good, you want to use it again and again.
Let the sunlight in.
Sunlight 2-in-1. Sunlight clean, sunlight fresh.
Sunlight in. Happiness is all around. Let the sunlight in.
Is your internet provider turning your world upside down? Broadband Company offers fast and reliable internet solutions. And for the first 100 subscribers this month, we offer zero connection fees. Save up to 400,000. For more information on these offers, call toll-free 0800 222 111.
Broadband Company, more than you expect. John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He is just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum tonight. What dangers is Uganda and other African countries likely to face due to climate change? We are also asking the question tonight. Are governments taking these matters seriously? Our guests, Mr. Isaac Kabong, Chairman Climate Action Network, Uganda, also Executive Director of the Ecological Christian Organization, and Mr. Robert Bakika, Deputy Executive Director of the Bwaise-based Environmental Management for Livelihood. You'll be able to call in and contribute to this discussion before we are done. Mr. Kabongo, what can we here in Uganda do to mitigate some of these problems?
I think we have a very big role to play in the whole process in terms of trying to solve the problem. And we find that maybe we have the segment of responsibilities by different sections of the population. So I will really look at maybe what, for example, local communities or what farmers or any other part families. Families could do. One of them is that if you planted a tree, only one tree, say per year, you are doing something.
Right.
Actually, you are contributing to solving the problem. You may not know that you are contributing, but if you plant a tree, whatever, regardless of the nature of the tree, you know there are some trees which absorb less carbon dioxide than others. But regardless of the tree, as